This video is made possible by Practical Defense Systems, the best online security training at the lowest prices. You can start your security career today online at pdsclasses.com. Check them out. Hi, I'm Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I'm very, very grateful. Look, I've got to tell you, there is a battle going on for our country, and it is going on at every level of government all around the nation, not just in places like California, although it's really going on right now, right here. Yes, we pay attention to what's going on in Washington, D.C. We pay attention to what's going on in Sacramento. But so often we forget about that one vital rule. All politics are local. It's incredibly important that we recognize that. It's vitally important that we focus not just on national things and state things, but what's happening locally. And I've got a great example for you in an outstanding interview. This interview is with a local mayor, the mayor of the city of El Cajon in San Diego County. Now, I've known Bill for quite a while. He's been mayor for quite a while, and he is a lone mayor in the sense that he's probably one of the very few conservative mayors in the entire state, and he's taken a beating. He's running for re-election, and I want to support him because we have to support these freedom fighters wherever they are, whether they're city council members or mayors or whatever. But I think his story is vital for you to hear. I think it's incredibly important for you to understand why it is so important to pay attention to your local politics. And the story of Bill and what he did with this city during the pandemic and where guns are concerned and everything else is concerned is going to be very important. So I do urge you to stick through the entire interview. It doesn't matter whether you live in California or live in El Cajon, who cares? Take what you learn from this interview home with you and apply that to your local leaders, your local mayor, your local fight. All right, let's go talk to Bill. Bill, thank you very much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. I know you're very busy and you got a lot going on. After all, you are running a city. I've never done that. So I thought I would give, I've been preaching this for a long time, and so hopefully you can help me to confirm it. And that is that all politics are local. People get all wigged out about what happens in Washington, D.C. They're all concerned about what's happening in Sacramento, but they forget about their city, their county, and the local leaders, school boards, and that kind of stuff. So I wanted to make sure I got you on the show because you are a great example of a conservative leader in a very liberal state. Yeah. So before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about you and what makes your leadership style different than what we see throughout California?
Well, probably what makes my leadership style different is I'm just an oddball. I'm a kind of a weird guy, but I'll tell you a little bit about my life. I grew up in San Diego at San Diego State. After graduating from San Diego State, went and worked as a musician for almost 10 years, traveled around the country, ended up in Hollywood, and then eventually just couldn't do that anymore. I got married, and my wife decided that poverty was probably not the best course of action to have a happy life. And so I went back to school and got my doctorate and started working in mental health. And I've spent my entire career working in mental health. I have a PhD in psychology and an RN. And I think that helps me, especially when it comes to the homeless. All the years I spent working in psychiatric hospitals, I certainly encountered lots and lots of homeless people. I've been involved in politics since about 2004, started on the Planning Commission, became a city council member, and then in 2013 was appointed as mayor because the mayor that we had to resign for some health reasons and some other reasons, and finished out his term, and then I was elected, and this is my third election as mayor. And you're right. I'm one of the few conservative mayors left in the entire county and really in the entire state.
There is a huge difference just on the border. I mean, I think the El Cajon borders La Mesa, doesn't it? And also borders the city of San Diego.
Yeah.
And when you look at the city of San Diego, we'll talk about guns here in a few minutes, but I think there's some other things that are important to people too. In the city of San Diego and the county has this huge homeless problem, but it doesn't seem to stick out like a sore thumb in the city of El Cajon. What is it that you've done differently?
Well, what I've done differently is I've refused to comply with what I've been told I have to do. The state of California says that you are not allowed to break up tents and encampments, but it's not a law. They use the Boise decision to kind of force that. The Boise decision is a decision that was made by the Supreme Court, says that the city has no right to dismantle homeless encampments unless you have somewhere you could offer these people as a place to go. So we've kind of got a two-pronged approach to homelessness in El Cajon. We offer lots of enforcement, but we also offer lots of treatment options. So when we go to a homeless encampment, we say, we're going to tear down this homeless encampment. But if you'd like to go and have a bed at the East County Transitional Living Center or one of these other programs that we have, we'll be glad to help you get into that and get clean and sober and get off the streets. And I think that's the big difference between me and the other cities, or our city and the other cities, because most of the Democrat-run cities have taken on the tack that homelessness is a natural part of life and that we need to get used to that and that we need to accept that. And there's a lot of finger pointing and saying you can't criminalize the homeless, you can't treat them badly. And I'm not into treating anybody badly. I think we should treat everybody with compassion and dignity. But I also think it's not compassionate to leave people to rot in their addictions on the side of the street. We don't allow tents on the street. We don't allow sleeping bags on the street, and we get people up and moving as much as we possibly can, even though the laws of California have made it really, really difficult to do that.
Now, I would think you're fairly popular with your constituents as a result, but is this bringing you some heat from other politicians and other places in the state?
Yeah, I've been pulled in front of the grand jury a few times. We get regular nasty letters from the ACLU and, other groups like that. But when you're talking about the people of El Cajon, yeah, I feel like I'm very well received. I feel a lot of love and good feelings from the people of El Cajon. But it was not homelessness that got me in the hearts of the people in El Cajon. It was really the COVID crisis. That's what really kind of.
I was going to bring that up because you were universally loathed by pro-lockdown, pro-mask politicians, I think, in this entire state. Yeah, but you refused to comply. I loved it. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, when the COVID crisis came along, I have a medical background and I had studied a lot about flus and pandemics in the past. So I felt fairly well educated about that. And the numbers they were giving us up front, saying that perhaps up to 30% of the people that contracted COVID were going to die, that was shocking. And so when they said, we all need to stand up and shut down for 2 weeks to, slow the spread and flatten the curve, I went along with that and said, okay, that makes sense. I mean, this is so virulent. We've got to do something. But then it was clear to me that it wasn't that virulent and that, like everybody, I started seeing all the numbers that, much less than 0.5% of the people that contracted COVID would die. And most of those people were over 70 years old. Most of those people had comorbidities. And it became clear to me that it didn't make any sense to lock down the entire world and destroy people's livelihoods and take away their civil rights was a good trade-off for a disease that mostly hurt the elderly. And, there are lots of ways we could have protected the elderly without shutting the world down. So that was half the equation. The other half of the equation is that as a psychologist, I think I invite people to come and tell me about their problems. I think it just naturally happens. And I had dozens of people telling me how depressed they were, how suicidal they were, how hopeless they felt. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night one night saying, I've got to do something. I don't know what I can do. And what we finally decided to do was to ask our police department to basically not enforce any COVID restrictions. We said, make it the least of your priority. So, people were calling all the time at that time saying, oh, this guy's walking down the street without a mask, send a police officer. And, other jurisdictions were doing that. Places like Solana Beach and Del Mar, they went pretty far down the totalitarian road with that. But we decided that we're just not going to get involved in that. And so people will call me and say, if I open my business, are you going to come shut us down? I said, our police will not. You may get a ticket from the county of San Diego. There's nothing I can do to stop that, but our police won't. And then later I had enough with masks, and I made some public pronouncements that I was no longer going to wear a mask. And so for the last year and a half, I haven't worn a mask, and that's been, interesting. And then the other thing we did is we didn't require vaccine to be employed by the city of El Cajon. So we weren't going to fire anybody for not having a vaccine. In fact, we picked up about 10 police officers from other jurisdictions, all blue jurisdictions, because they were being let go by their jurisdictions. So we picked up police officers that were well-trained and well-seasoned. We didn't have to put them through an academy. They were ready to go. So it worked out well for us. But, at the time, I thought it was political suicide, but I found out later that people really appreciated that. And it's nice to be on the right side of history now that everybody kind of tends to agree that the vaccines don't work and the masks don't work and the shutdowns don't work. So,
yeah, I think you've been confirmed as right at this point multiple times. You brought up the cops. Okay, that's an interesting little subject matter here, because we had defund the police all over the place. Somewhere in there, we had a little mini riot of sorts in the neighboring city in La Mesa where they burnt down a couple of banks, I think, and a couple of other things. That didn't go well. And all the while, I think when there was a big cry to defund the police around the state, and the subject matter came up in San Diego, I remember texting you and saying, Bill, my wife and I do not support defunding the police in the city of El Cajon. And then you texted me back in about 30 seconds going, neither do I. Tell me about that. What happened with the police department in your city? Because not only did you not defund them, didn't you increase the funding?
Yeah, we did. And, the police can always use more funding. But I got to be honest, it was kind of a stick in the eye to all these defund the police idiots. I very few things have upset me as much as that. And part of it's being, pro-military, pro-police. I certainly am in that camp, but I'm also pro not being killed. I'm pro not having my wife raped or, my store looted. And so I'm a big law and order guy. And I thought it was so reckless for politicians around the state to give in to these ridiculous political impulses and to adopt it just because you want to be popular. I really dislike that. So I suggested we raise the police's budget, and then a couple months after that, we went ahead and raised the budget more because we overhired. So we had spots for 5 officers. We hired 10 because they were available and they were trained right now from the other cities. So yeah, that's where I stand on it.
The other day I read that Attorney General Bonta, don't get me started, was praising the city of San Diego for its use of red flag laws, of GVROs, and because they've used it like 900 times in a year or something. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on these things. Well,
it's kind of like hate crimes. If you talk to somebody about hate crime legislation, on the face of it, it doesn't sound like a bad idea, right? We don't want hate crimes. We don't want people hating others and using crime violence to make their point. But then you think about it, you say, well, we already have all those laws on the books anyway. It really doesn't matter what's in your mind or your heart. When you murder somebody, you still have to get punished for doing the job. Now, when red flag laws come, we have a system in place to protect people that are being threatened by a dangerous person with a gun. If a woman goes into the court system, it's usually a woman, sometimes it's a man, and asks for a temporary restraining order or a full-time restraining order on an ex-spouse or boyfriend because they've threatened to kill them with a gun, they will lose their ability to keep that gun until a judge reviews the case and decides whether or not to grant that restraining order. I'm not against that. I think if you're threatening to kill people, I don't think you should have a weapon. But this kind of I'll give you an example. My son's a special forces guy. He's out now. He was in Afghanistan and got hurt a little bit, but he should be able to have a gun, and nobody should be able to make a phone call and say, well, he has PTSD issues, so you've got to take away his gun. I think that's really way too far. And I think that's the problem with these red flags laws is it's also left up to interpretation. If you open the door a crack, there's going to be somebody else who's going to come and say, well, this guy is on, I don't know, he's on Ativan for anxiety. That's a psychotropic medication. We got to take his gun away. You know where I'm going with this. This is kind of the slippery slope. For example, I think the city of San Diego recently issued an ordinance that said that you can't have an unlocked gun in your home. So you have to have it locked up at all times. And I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. I think people are generally smart enough to know when their gun's in danger and when their gun's not, where somebody could use it. And certainly if a gun is for self-protection, having it put away in a place where you can't get to it readily doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So that can happen at the city level, and we certainly are not going to allow that to happen in El Cajon. So the gun ownership is being attacked at every level. It's, I think the county of San Diego didn't recently declare gun ownership a public health emergency.
I don't remember it. Yeah, I think I read that someplace, but I don't know the details.
I believe that happened. And,
it wouldn't surprise me.
And that's scary because because if you had said that 5 years ago, I'd say, so what? What does that mean? It means nothing. But now, after COVID, we realize that a public health emergency kind of opens the door to doing anything you want. You can act like communist China if you want, because there's a public health emergency. It's shocking to me how many civil rights just evaporated during the entire COVID thing. And that was all based on a public health emergency. So I think that's one of the ways they're going to come after us. Certainly they're coming after us with ammunition and having to go through a process to background checks to get ammunition, or the stamping laws or the insurance laws. I mean, or this new one that they're pushing tonight, where they're trying to make basically every inch of California a gun-free zone, even though the Supreme Court has already ruled that it's against the Second Amendment to not allow people to have concealed carry. So, I think the fight is at every level, Joel. I guess that's what, and it's super important. As a mayor of a mid-sized city, like every other person who's ambitious, there are times when I think, well, I'd love to go to Congress or, do something at the higher level. But I always come back to the fact that God may very well want me to be right where I am, because I probably get more done as a mayor, and I protect more people's rights as a mayor than I ever could in Congress or the Senate, or certainly as a assemblyman in Sacramento. So I think it's super important. The gun laws are a perfect example of this. It's super important that we really support local politics.
Bill, I've known you for a while, and I've watched you take a beating on a number of occasions because you stood in the gap between citizens and people who wanted to strip them of their freedoms. How much power does a mayor have to stand in the gap on some of these things? And where is that power limited?
Well, sometimes that's very ambiguous. Certainly there are a lot of limits to the power. I'm not allowed to supersede state law. So for a outrageous example, if I decided that murder was no longer should be punished, I couldn't pass an ordinance that said, in El Cajon, murder is legal, because the state and the federal law supersede us. But there are a lot of things that a mayor can do by allocating funding and not allocating funding, by, especially in regards to public safety and helping out the individuals that live in your city. There's a lot a mayor can do, and most of it has to be just what you said. You have to be willing to stand up against these forces that are just going to roll over you and say, your citizens are no longer allowed to do this. They're no longer allowed to do that. And you say, you know what, take me to court. I mean, we're going to continue to be Americans. We're going to continue to protect the Constitution. And as long as I feel like I have right on my side, meaning that the Constitution protects what I'm saying, what I'm doing, I'll do that all day long.
What are your thoughts? Because people are going to ask me, you kind of alluded to it a minute ago, but what are your thoughts on the Second Amendment? I know you are a gun owner. I know at one point or other, it seems to me you owned part of a gun shop, I think, didn't you?
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on the Second Amendment and the rights of Californians and where it's going?
We have a system that has worked so well in giving people a good quality of life and protecting their freedoms. So I think I'm bound as a logical person, as an elected official, as an American, to do everything I possibly can to protect the Constitution. That's every aspect of the Constitution. So, I mean, it's not just the Second Amendment that's under assault right now. The First Amendment is under huge assault right now. And the Fourth Amendment is under big assault right now. We have to protect it all. But to get more specific, I think that if we ever give up the Second Amendment, if we ever roll over on that, that will be the first and a very short step towards total totalitarianism. I believe that the number of guns and the people that own those guns in America is one of the things that stops the entire world from doing this complete reset into socialism, communism, and complete totalitarianism. So it is as important as anything in my life.
Which brings up an interesting question about city mayors in places that are very restrictive, like California. How much authority does, or how much power does a city mayor have, or a city council have, or a city police chief have to decide, you know what, those are laws we're simply not going to enforce. We're not going to stop you, county sheriff or federal government, if you come in to do it. But we've decided to actually not break the Constitution and violate our oath by enforcing laws we seem to believe are unconstitutional. Is that something a mayor can do?
Yeah, it's a very vague, not firm place that we're in. You know, I am a law and order guy. And if you had asked me when I first got elected, if I ever would defy the edicts, it wasn't, in my case, it wasn't a law, it was more of an edict from the county health officials, I would have said, no, I can't imagine doing that. But, you know, I did have to stand up and do that during COVID. So I'll give you an example of my son, who was, like I said, a special forces guy. If somebody called me about a guy like him, or if somebody called our police department about a guy like him and say, you need to go and take away his guns, and the law said you could do that because we think he's unstable because he was in combat and he probably has PTSD and he may have these other problems. I certainly would not be in favor of being involved in that kind of thing. But like I said, it's a tricky thing because I don't have jurisdiction over the laws of the state of California. So these are some things that every time I have to work with my city attorney. And when we decided not to enforce the COVID restrictions, I mean, it was not just a small decision. We had multiple conferences with attorneys and got a lot of feedback that, hey, you know, you're breaking the law here. What we finally decided was that the COVID restrictions weren't really a state law. They were this vague concept of using your emergency powers to enforce an edict. And so we finally decided that legally we were not running afoul by doing that. Yeah, so a lot of people ask me to pass resolutions, and sometimes city councils will do that. They'll pass a resolution that says, you know, El Cajon is a Second Amendment sanctuary, or you know, El Cajon CRT is not allowed in El Cajon, or we stand against it. And if you pass a resolution, you can get a chance to go before the microphones and say, this is what we believe. But it really doesn't move the needle one way or the other. I mean, it's not law. It has no binding effect on anybody. And so I'm reluctant to do that because a lot of it seems like political grandstanding.
It sounds to me like there's no effect to that whatever in any way, isn't it?
Yeah. Generally, no. And, the left does it too, right? This county of San Diego just recently passed a resolution redefining what a woman is. I'm not sure I can keep up with all their definition of what a woman is, but it has no binding effect, right? They will pass resolutions all the time, kind of signaling their credentials as good liberals, but it means nothing. And so I think we need to get away from that. And it's the political theater in general is kind of run amok, and it's not very valuable. We should really focus on things that we can actually do.
This is important stuff, Bill, because I think I've mentioned to you before that, you and I are of similar age, although I think I'm older, and you'll always feel young as a result of that.
That's great. I love that.
Hallelujah. Take it when you can get it, right? But, you remember in school, in high school, you used to have a class called civics, and they taught you how the government works. And that hasn't been around for a very, very long time. And I run into a lot of people who just don't even have a basic understanding of how their government works. And a lot of times folks are under the impression that doing this kind of stuff is simple. It doesn't require getting everybody in the government, city council, city manager, and so on to agree before you take a step. You mentioned consulting with the city attorney and that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of machinations that go on even before you can do things like you did with the whole COVID thing and deciding not to enforce that.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. And that kind of stops you from just running out and doing things willy-nilly. But there certainly are things that come up, issues that come up that are so egregious and so important that you do have to take a stand. And I'm always open to that.
And so I want to ask you this question before I give you the mic and say, run with it, do what you want to do, and give you the closing remark here. I started off by saying that local politics, all politics are local. Why is it that statement is true? Why are local politics, mayor's races, city council races, the dog catcher, the school board, whatever? Why is that vital if we want to actually have some effect on what's happening to our country?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you live in this town. So when you're talking about talk about Darrell Issa in DC, who's working for you, and he's doing a good job. I love Darrell Issa. But he is one of 500 congressmen, and he's working on laws that may or may not affect you, probably won't directly. But everything that's happening in the city of El Cajon is affecting the residents of El Cajon. Our decisions about whether or not to allow Wells Park to be infested with homeless or to do what we did, which was spend $10 million and clear the homeless out, that affects you, affects your ability to go to that park, it affects your ability to walk by that park. Whether or not we're going to be cleaning homeless off the streets and allowing tents, I mean, try to live down by Petco Park, and you could tell me what the difference is between one city and the other. Defunding the police versus building up our police and funding the police and overfunding the police. You can tell me what it's like to live in a city where the police are demoralized and they don't have enough resources versus a place where the police feel good about their job, they feel good about the people they're working for. And I think it makes a huge difference. And, interestingly enough, that the paradox of that is that most people think very little about local politics. They don't really care who's on their city council. They don't care that much who's their mayor. And it should probably be the opposite. It's probably going to affect your life a lot more than who's the governor or who's the president.
Well, and interestingly, some of those folks that start out at the city council end up becoming the mayor and then end up becoming the assembly member or the state senator or the governor or the congress member or president of the United States. I mean, it's kind of the local folks are the farm team to advance up, aren't they?
Yeah, and to that point, it's a really good opportunity to watch somebody in action and to know what they're really about. Because when you go to, obviously you've run into politicians before that were running for the first time and said, I'm going to do everything for you. I'm going to do everything you want. And you're going to be so happy. And then they get in the office and they realize they can't do a thousandth of what they promised because there are so many impediments to doing all the things they want to do. And then they become part of the machine and they end up not doing anything. I ran into somebody who was a young, charismatic guy who was running for Congress. And he met with me and told me how great he was going to be and all the promises he made. And I said, you're young. Why don't you run for city council or school board and let people watch you for a couple of years and then run for the big office so that you can go back and say, not this is what I promised, but say, this is what I did. This is how I behaved. This is my record. So I agree with you. It's, I certainly would rather elect somebody to Congress who's been the mayor of a city or been president of a school board than somebody who just shows up and says, no, vote for me because I tell you I'm good.
Which brings up an interesting question, because I've seen, I think we've all seen this. I've seen people show up in the United States Congress or Senate, and they don't have a penny to their name really, or they have very little. And then within a couple of years, they're millionaires. How hard is it to, as a politician, to resist that kind of stuff and actually stick to your principles? And how often is it that they get co-opted, or corrupted is probably a better word, by all the money that ends up heading their way?
Oh, yeah. Look, I think that reform in that area is long, long overdue. I actually think I'd be a perfect guy to go to Congress because I've got my own business. I have enough income. I don't need the paycheck from the state of California or the federal government. And I think it was one of the things that was attractive about Trump. It's like he wasn't going to be bought off. He was a billionaire, and I have seen so many times when guys are worried about keeping their paycheck, and they're saying, if I say the wrong thing or vote the wrong way, I could lose this next election, and then I have to take the kids out of private school. I'm gonna have to maybe move, and so they do whatever they have to do to protect their situation. That's a terrible way to do business in politics. You should always be doing the right thing. You should never have to worry about where enough money is going to come from. And so I think that's a good reason to have term limits at the congressional level. And I know that there are some bad things about that. But when people know they're ensconced forever, then they feel more comfortable about making these kind of shady deals. And like Joe Biden lives in a $14 million mansion where he's been in public service since the 1950s. So, I don't know how you make $200,000 a year and have a $14 million mansion. I certainly don't have a $14 million mansion. So,
Bill, we've been on for a long time here, and so I want to let you go. I know you got a lot to do. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say thank you very much for coming on the show. And here you go. Last word, go. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk to anybody in the Second Amendment movement. I know you might have some questions. If you get any good questions that you feel like need an answer from me, just pass it on to me. And I'm happy to sit and talk to anybody about anything. Outstanding. Thank you, brother. Have a wonderful week and stay safe. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All righty. Bye-bye. Thank you very much again for listening to the entire interview and sitting through it. I realize sometimes that these interviews are long, but they're incredibly important. If we're going to save our country, if we're going to restore our rights, because I'm not going to say save our rights because we've already lost a lot of them. We need to restore them. There are a lot of good people fighting to do that. And one of the people who can really help protect you as we go forward in this battle is obviously your local mayor. So I urge you to get involved in your local political fight. Now, if you happen to be in the city of El Cajon, you're not going to find a better person to be mayor of that city than Bill Wells. So if you're in that city, I urge you to vote for him. No matter whether you live there or not, if you'd like to contribute to his campaign because you want to help a local mayor in a crazy state like California who is fighting for your rights, then I'll put a link in the description so that you can do that. And, Bill said, if you have questions and you want to ask him questions, just let me know, or you can contact him directly. I will make sure that any comments that come in that are questions for Bill, that I'll send to him. In fact, you can send them directly to me by email if you want. You can send that to GunGuyTV@gmail.com, and that'll get to me, and I will forward it to him, and he'll answer your question. And I'm sure that Bill will be on the show again. Thank you again for watching. Have a great week. And wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.